exaggerate in praising me. So this is another clue that one of the ways this happens is an exaggeration in praising. Another thing that the Quran talks about is that in calling someone a son of God, the Quran tells us that they imitate the saying of the pagans of old. In other words, calling someone a son of God is an imitation of the language and the usage and the concepts of paganism. And so this is another thing that took place. Imitating paganism. An imitation of the ways of the pagans. So exaggeration, imitation of the disbelievers and the idol worshippers, along with that corruption of the scriptures, and along with that evil intentions of some people amongst the Jews who wanted to humiliate and defeat and be away with Jesus. Because that was one of their characteristics that we found they displayed sometimes, not all the time, but they used to, if they found the prophet came to them with something they didn't like, they would try to kill that prophet. Jesus was one of those people. He came with a message they didn't want to hear. He came telling them something, they didn't like it. So what did they try to do? They tried to kill him. Now why we will find out, there is one particular death that they wanted for Jesus, and one particular death only. And that particular death was crucifixion. And this becomes very interesting. So now if we go back and we look and we imagine. Imagine Israel. Very interesting. In fact, brothers and sisters, if you get into studying this very deeply, you will be absolutely amazed at the similarities between the condition of the Muslims today and the condition of the Muslims then. And who were the Muslims then? The Jews. They were the Muslims then. They were the believers. They were the followers of the prophets. They were the Muslims. Jesus, alayhi salam, Isa ibn Maryam, was a Muslim. His religion was Islam, and his followers were Muslims. And what do we find? An amazingly similar situation. Just as we find our lands are occupied by our enemies who want to implement the laws of disbelief, the ways of democracy, the inventions of human beings, and they are forcing us to abandon the laws of Allah. For example, the recent constitution that has been drawn up in Iraq says that the religion of Iraq is Islam, but the laws of Iraq are not going to be taken from Islam. Of course, every Muslim who understands what Islam is knows this is just pure kufr. It's pure disbelief. Because God is the sovereign. And every Muslim has to rule according to the laws of God. And in fact, every Jew believes that too. That they should implement, in that time they knew that they should implement the laws of God. And that is what they meant by the kingdom of God. For them, the kingdom of God meant that the nation is ruled according to God's law. In its spirit and in its letter. Now there were some people who followed the letter but ignored the spirit. And some people who were more with the spirit of the law but they did not follow the letter. But no, in fact, the correct thing is to follow the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And it's very interesting that again, what Jesus says as opposed to what Paul teaches are completely different doctrine. The words of Jesus in the gospel are telling us that I have not come to change the law, but I've come to fulfill it. And whoever changes or leaves one dot, or one iota of the law will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. Yet Paul teaches that the law is cursed. That the law is finished. You don't need the law. You don't need to get circumcised. Be circumcised in your heart. You know, some of us, we've heard that before, right? Yes, I don't wear hijab. I wear it in my heart. I don't grow my beard. It's in my heart. And my heart's got a beard. Okay? The sunnah is in my... No, seriously. You've heard you must have heard people say, oh, Islam is in my heart. You've heard that before, okay? We don't need to follow the law in letter, we just need the spirit. Well, it's the same problem Jesus was facing. The same thing. There were some people who were all about following the spirit, as they called it, which actually was just an excuse to follow Greek Roman culture, to imitate the kuffar. The same problem we have, brothers and sisters. Exactly the same problem we have today. Gucci, Armani, and Christian Dior, right? Same problem. That we have now, they had then. I have a picture here of a synagogue. A synagogue in the Holy Land. Check out this picture of this synagogue. Okay, can you see it? This is the synagogue. With Roman pillars. It looks like a Roman temple. Yet that is a synagogue. So this is the influence in Palestine, in what at the time was Israel, but it was occupied, of course, by the Romans. The Romans were the kuffar. They worshipped Caesar as God. And wherever they went, they implemented what? The laws of God? The laws of Yahweh? No, they implemented the laws of Rome. And they collected taxes for the Roman Empire. This is what they did. And of course there were zealots. Zealots, we could translate them quite easily as Muslim fundamentalists. Okay? They were zealots, people who were zealous and jealous for the law. They believed that they should fight the Romans, throw them out of the Holy Land. This was the kingdom of God. They should not pollute the temple and pollute the Holy Land. They should be thrown out. And the law of God should be implemented in spirit and in letter. And then, of course, you had existing the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And between them were different groups of people. For example, the high priest later was known, and he was despised by the population for being a Roman stooge. He was a stooge of the Romans, completely doing what they wanted. Pretty much today, as we notice, there are many Muslim speakers. There are people who outwardly profess scholarship, yet they are doing exactly what their governments want, and often that's what the West wants. And we know it, brothers and sisters. Let's not pretend. These people exist. When the hijab ban happened in France, what do we find? So-called mufti coming out and saying, Muslims in the West don't have to wear hijab. Yes. Extraordinary. So they had these people as well in that time. People who were ready, they just wanted everything to be nice between them and the Romans. The Romans let them keep their priesthood, their traditional Judaism, like you find today people talking about traditional Islam, which is quite often is just an excuse for their compromising mentality. It's the same. Study, it's fascinating. So you had these people. Now it's interesting that these zealots had different names. And one of the names they had was Nazarenes. Nazarenes. This means that they were devoted to the law. In fact, it's very interesting that we have no account of a place called Nazareth. Nazareth, as far as we know, we have no account of a town or a place called Nazareth. And of course, it might be anyone who knows the story of Jesus, okay, knows that he's supposed to be Jesus of Nazareth. But interestingly enough, when they searched for Nazareth, it exists now, but then it didn't. And it's quite extraordinary that it doesn't. But however, this term Nazarene does, a zealot for the law. And then a very interesting thing happened recently. They discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now this is something we could talk a lot about. But essentially what they found when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls was a community of people who were establishing obedience to God, the law of God, and they were zealots for the law, and they were ready to fight the Roman occupiers. This is what they were ready to do. And it seems that there is plenty of evidence that these, in fact, themselves